Hello, I'm Patrick Farnsworth. Welcome to Access and Privacy Online Commentary. Here's a prior segment from our weekly rundown. BC Information and Privacy Commissioner Michael Harvey has been on the job for a few months. This week we are seeing some of the first major releases from his office. Joining me now is FIPA President Mike Larsen to help break these down. First up, Graham Wood from Glacier Media brings us a story from an OIPC release. Vancouver Coastal Health, or VCH, is facing heavy criticism for consistently violating access to information laws. The BC OIPC report reveals that VCH routinely delays or withholds public access to important health-related information. Access to timely information is crucial, especially in the health sector, where decisions directly impact public well-being. Mike, what is your takeaway from the report?
So I have a few takeaways on this one that I'm happy to share. I think I'm going to start with the specifics of the report here, the actual content of the story itself. So this is based on this OIPC investigation and audit of Vancouver Coastal Health's compliance with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act when it responds to records requests through the period of the pandemic and then for a couple of years. And the report is detailed, it's comprehensive, and it's pretty damning. And for the journalists who've covered this, who've said, well, this raises lots of red flags, I agree. The lack of transparency that we see here is not a one-off thing. It's not an anecdotal problem. The OIPC report documents a rather systemic issue with delays, and I think with the deprioritization of transparency. Now, we know Vancouver Coastal Health has important priorities. All public health bodies have a vital role to play in the health, literally, of our public. But I think as the OIPC points out here, to be transparent is also a core mandate issue for any government institution, right? It's not an afterthought. It shouldn't be seen as something that you can do in addition to what you already do. It should be part of everyday practice to be transparent. And the report really documents that this was not happening. This was not the case. It points, I think, to the need for stronger enforcement of our access to information laws. It points to the need for, I think, a lot of close scrutiny of the follow-up from Vancouver Coastal Health on this to ensure that all of the recommendations, the issues that have been flagged are being addressed. At the worst, they had 8 in 10 FOI requests for information were somehow out of sync or not in compliance with the requirements of the law. That's a pretty bad average. Now, the commissioner does note, as part of the report here, that there is a second story. Yeah, there's a first story which deals with this issue of a lack of compliance and the deprioritization of transparency. The second story is that throughout the course of the audit, you do start to see improvements in Vancouver Coastal Health's compliance with FOI regulations. They recognize and start to engage in some degree of kind of course correction as they're going forward. So he says, well, this is optimistic, right? This is indicative of what happens to organizations when they recognize that transparency can't be set aside. So that's hopeful. I think that second story needs to be acknowledged, but we're still not in a state with this organization of proper compliance, and there's more work yet to be done. So on the specific issues, I think a really interesting investigation. Stepping back a little bit, though, 2 further points, I think. One, this audit report in general reflects the importance of the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. Individuals can take up cases where they believe their FOI rights, their right to know, have been infringed upon. Certainly everyone who uses FOI has experiences of systemic delay and undue redaction, all these kinds of things. And those who use the acts to get public records on a regular basis notice patterns in compliance. But the OIPC has the authority and the resources and the mandate to do these more systemic reviews, to go from the anecdote to the analysis, if you will, the audit in this case. And this is a great example of that, right? So rather than saying, geez, it looks like they're not really compliant and it's, my requests aren't getting properly responded to, OIPC says, look, this is the pattern. Here's the data. Here's what we see when we lift the lid and look inside. An indication of the importance of this office and its counterparts across Canada. So I would flag that. Other thing I would note is that during the pandemic, especially in the early phases, at FIPA, we recognized that because there was so much change taking place, there were new policies being enacted, there was a lot of change in procedure, we recognized that organizations, government agencies were starting to treat transparency as a luxury while they focused on other issues. And transparency is not a luxury. It is essential to public bodies. And so this report really confirms that observation that a lot of organizations, including us, had during the pandemic, that the crisis mentality, the swiftness of response and the churn of response led to transparency being, kind of set aside as something to worry about later. And indeed, that should never be the case. So very interesting all around and an important report.
Now, the OIPC also announced that it has launched an electronic survey to evaluate how municipalities in British Columbia make public records available. Mike, what's the details on the survey?
The details are that the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, the new commissioner, Commissioner Harvey, has decided to use their powers to conduct a comprehensive survey of municipalities in BC to understand how they are making the records that they have control of, that they produce, available to the public. In other words, how they are complying with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And this is really important, actually. We really haven't seen too many initiatives of this kind being conducted, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing the results of this. You've got over 161 municipalities in BC, and those really range in size, and this is the key, from very small municipalities to, of course, the largest cities in the province. But importantly, the same law governs access to information, right? Our information rights as citizens, regardless of the municipality we live in. The FIPA is comprehensive in British Columbia. So your right to know what's going on in your municipality shouldn't differ in a small community versus a very large community. In practice, we know it does, though, and in part it's a reflection of resources. Some large municipalities have the resources to put together their own independent offices that deal specifically with information requests. They have more of an infrastructure. They'd certainly have more of a web infrastructure for presenting information to the public, and others don't. There's a really uneven terrain despite the consistent law, right, that recognizes all of us as having the exact same rights regardless of the size of the place we live. So getting a sense, actually getting a pulse of how this is handled differently is the objective of this survey. It's important to note that the commissioner has emphasized the importance of the timeliness in terms of responses. So they're expecting the results of the survey fairly quickly, and they're going to compile and make those available. And I think that's going to reveal a pretty interesting pattern in terms of the haves and have-nots of good practices with this. And crucially, they're interested not just in how municipalities respond to FOI requests for public records, but what they do in terms of proactive disclosure, so how they proactively publish information of interest and all the processes they use to actually do this, or how they make records available for purchase. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for organizations like FIPA to respond to this once we see the findings on this. So very interesting stuff.
From a FIPA perspective, is this encouraging or discouraging?
Well, if I had to describe our perspective on this, I would say cautiously optimistic, but it remains to be seen how this actually turns out. The proof will be in the pudding, I suppose. I love the fact that the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner has emphasized timeliness in terms of response for this. One of the challenges with doing comprehensive research on the functioning of FOI, which is something FIPA does on an ongoing basis, is we need to get information fast enough for it to be timely, right? For our responses to actually be consistent and our analysis to be consistent. So OIPC is doing this in this case, which is, I think, really important. I'm also looking forward to seeing how much of the information OIPC makes available to the public in terms of their findings. Obviously, they're going to release a report on this, but more data in this instance is better, so we can start drilling down and looking at, well, what are the best practices? Where do we see the gaps on this? The fact that this kind of broad, systematic research is being conducted by OIPC to look at compliance at a really fundamental level and look at these practices in a comparative fashion, I think is a very good sign. OIPC has limited resources. They have to prioritize what they're going to focus their attention on, and quite often they're responding to these major crises, right? Scandals, serious and egregious gaps in compliance with the law, major privacy breaches, things of this nature, and they still will, of course, respond to those. But it's nice to see this kind of baseline comprehensive work being done to set the right tone and figure out how municipalities need to improve on this. I will be looking forward with bated breath to see the results of the report.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Mike. Access and Privacy Online reviews the headlines and delivers deeper commentary on a regular basis. Be sure to subscribe to get the full episodes every week and get notifications when we release show segments and other commentary throughout the week. We look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a good one.